ISO Productions presents another instructional video tutorial from ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Well, hello there, and welcome back to yet another FileMaker tutorial video. My name is Matt Petrowski, bringing you these FileMaker tutorials over at FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video, we're taking a look at the topic of user tracking with Google Analytics. We're going to be doing some quick and easy implementation. Now, I've shown content about using Google Analytics before, but there have been a lot of advances in how you can use Google Analytics, and it really is very easy to implement into your file. Let's take a look at what I'm talking about. Now, before we head into the file, the first thing that you probably need to be aware of is Google Analytics itself. Now, Google Analytics is something that was purchased a while ago it originally started out as a product called Urchin. Google acquired it, and now they provide Google Analytics pretty much for free. In fact, you can access that at www.google.com/analytics. Now, as you can see, you can easily create your own account if you don't have a Google account, or you can simply sign in. And the first time you sign in, it will actually create your account. Now, you can see as it cycles through here, you've got all of these really pretty graphs and representations of what's happening. And this measurement tool that Google provides for free allows you to capture metrics about your website. But because we are not working with a website, we're working within a FileMaker solution, we want to take advantage of what we have available to us. It's only going to require a little bit of tweaking and understanding how analytics is actually implemented from the standpoint of a web page. But because we have the integrated web viewer within FileMaker Pro itself, we have access to be able to track pretty much anything in many different ways. So let's take a look at a logged in session of Google Analytics and take a look at what we get. All right, so here we are logged into my Google Analytics account within Chrome, and we can take a look at a general overview. And I'm obviously not going to be able to give you all of the details about everything that analytics can do, but what I do want to give you in this video is I want to give you the information that allows you to explore the feature set in terms of how you can implement, leverage, and use this within your FileMaker solution. Now, as I mentioned, starting out going all the way back to when Google Analytics was Urchin, it was designed specifically just for web pages and websites, a tracking or a tool for gathering metrics about people who came to your websites. Fundamentally, this means that everything is pretty much session-based. When you go to a website within a web browser, you're there for a certain period of time and then you leave. So you need to keep this premise within mind when you're implementing. When a user opens a FileMaker solution, they're pretty much in that FileMaker solution until they close out. Maybe they'll step away and grab some coffee, but for the most part, their session is the whole time that they're working within FileMaker, and then when they close this out. This is much different than in a web page. On a website, you go there, maybe you're there for a few minutes, maybe, depending on the website, if it's Facebook, maybe you're there for 15, 20 minutes. Some people longer, but eventually you leave. So Google Analytics has a lot of information that we don't necessarily need. Now you can see as I make a selection right here, you can have a number of accounts, and those accounts can have what Google calls properties. Now these properties are basically just tracking ID values. So we can see as I expand this that I have, for example, FileMaker Talk, FileMaker Themes, Got Drupal, Search Drupal, a number of sites that I haven't even been tracking for a while, FileMaker Templates, FileMaker World, Scriptology, and you can see all of these IDs. These IDs are the IDs that you put into your website in order to track. So one of the things that I've done, you can see right here that the Theme Studio app, a solution that I provide, does actually do tracking. And the technique file that you have access to, as I expand this videos, has also been set up to have tracking. In fact, the tracking ID right here is the piece of information that's within the FileMaker file that's used within a web viewer in order to actually invoke the tracking. And you can see that I've named this actual particular profile a FileMaker solution. Now, the interesting thing to note is that within any given account that is assigned an ID, you can have as many different websites or web properties within that one particular ID. Now, it's beyond the scope of this video, but let's say, for example, you're providing a commercial solution and you have multiple different people using this. As long as each of those different collections or those different versions, no, they're not different versions, different copies, that's the word I'm looking for. Those different copies have something that's unique, but not necessarily user identifying. You can't, it's against Google's terms in order to track users that would allow you to identify individual people. But in terms of generic information, let's say a UUID on a particular copy that's assigned when that particular version or that copy of your FileMaker solution opens, you would be able to break this out. Now, that information in and of itself is nice to know, but what's most important to know about the information that you collect is that how you collect it determines what type of reports you can get out of it. For example, in Google Analytics, it has this area called advanced segments, which we're able to use in order to get a more fine-grained picture of how people use your FileMaker solution. There are a lot of standard segments that Google provides, and those are all of the things that you're going to find here on the side, such as these standard reports. Now, the standard reports really aren't going to mean a whole lot to us with regards to our FileMaker solution. They do have real-time tracking, which we'll take a look at, but for the most part, the content is what we're interested in. We can use things such as the traffic sources, but pretty much only for IP-based things. Really, the way that you integrate Google Analytics into your FileMaker solution is completely up to you, and it's my goal throughout the rest of this video to give you the insight in order to implement in a fashion that allows you to take advantage of analytics, especially since it's free. So when we take a look at, for example, content, everything within a web page is based on the URL. So obviously up here at the URL, we have our domain, which we don't have necessarily within a FileMaker solution, but then we have a path. In this case, it's analytics/web. So if we know that everything with regards to how analytics works is tracking based on a URL, we can break our FileMaker solution down in that same fashion. And you're going to see when we take a look at the actual technique file how this is actually done. Now, what you're able to do is you're able to click on the overview, and as I scroll down, you're going to see these areas in my analytics account for this FileMaker solution, which I connected a new ID, which you can go into the admin section and actually set up new IDs, new profiles, things that are beyond the scope of this video. But basically, be aware that you can. But basically, you can see right here that I have /another layout, /main, /yet another. And it has percentages of page views. Now, bear in mind that I talked about that whole session model. The way that Google tracks is it tracks based on a timeout, or based on a time frame in which it actually recognizes that a user is on a website and then attempts to track everything that they do. And then when you depart, it tracks things such as bounce rate. In other words, if we go up here to this dashboards and you select on the My Dashboard, by default, Google Analytics is going to have a lot of information that you don't necessarily need. For example, you may not want to know the difference of new visits versus unique visitors, or you may, depending on how your solution is actually used. If it's an in-house solution, you're probably going to be using analytics just for the purpose of tracking the usage of a solution. If you have a shrink wrap solution, you want to track the number of different users and from where, maybe things like geolocation, where visits are coming from, is important to you. But when we get to things like bounce rate, what we're able to do within analytics is we're able to customize everything quite extensively. The types of reports, how those reports are generated, what is displayed, what's automatically filtered out, and all of those things. When it comes to visits by browser, FileMaker only uses two browsers. It's either IE on Windows or it's Safari using WebKit underneath on the Macintosh. But you can see that right here, I can easily modify this dashboard. So I can get this right off of my view. So part of the whole trick to using Google Analytics is setting up your reporting and then customizing your dashboard so that it fits the way that you want to get information about your FileMaker solution and how it's actually used. So you can see right here, just a couple days ago, I started my tracking on this technique file. And this tracking, as you've opened this technique file and all others have opened this technique file, will give me insight into who is opening this file, or I should say, how many people are opening this file, and what layouts they are actually going to. So keep in mind that the only thing that this technique file is tracking currently is layouts, but you are in no way limited to just your layouts. And that is because FileMaker, or not FileMaker, Google Analytics, I should say, provides the ability to track things which are called events. In fact, within the technique file, which we're going to see very shortly here, I have a link that goes to the developer specifications for modifying the Google Analytics tracking code in order to determine what you want to track and how. But if we go to this section called events within content, so if you think about this, I want you to draw a correlation in your mind that all of your layouts are pretty much roughly equivalent to subsections or areas within a website. You can also do it in a different fashion, but that's how I've decided to do it within this technique file. Well, on top of that, we have this thing called events. Now, events are things that the user, from a web perspective, may do within a web page. A prime example would be a video player, and when the user clicked on the play button versus when they click on the pause button versus when they click on the resume button, and then knowing what the time delay is. And if you have a lot of people that say click start and then click stop by about 1 minute that they get into the web page, then you know that they're not watching the full video. You're not taking advantage of maybe what that video is supposed to do. So maybe that's a clue that you need to reduce the length of the video. In FileMaker terms, what we're looking at is how many times did this particular button get clicked on this particular layout? How many times did they go to this particular layout? How many times was this particular report actually printed? Now, all of these things can be done using a combination of events and tracking the page itself. And for the rest of this video, what we're going to take a look at is the FileMaker technique file itself and break down how we're actually getting the information from FileMaker using a web viewer into Google Analytics. Let's go take a look at that. All right, so here we go with the actual technique file, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to actually track each and every layout that you want and each and every user event or user action, such as clicking on a button or printing a report or things of those nature, and some tips about how you might want to facilitate the actual tracking. So in this technique file, a web viewer, bare minimum, is required in order to actually perform the tracking. The key thing to know about FileMaker and its web viewers are that FileMaker will refresh web viewers all the time. In other words, if I went out to this window and I actually drag this window and I had a web viewer on screen, which currently it's off screen, I'm going to show you, that web viewer would continue to update. So the whole trick with using the web viewer for the purpose of analytics is that you only want the analytics to be tracked when you want the analytics to be tracked. You don't want it to be sitting within the web viewer and the web viewer constantly hitting the Google Analytics website. You won't get an accurate representation of what you're looking for. So as I go into this solution, I want you to take note of the fact that I have the layouts of main, another layout, yet another layout. No, those are all of the familiar web pages that I was actually tracking. And most of the time, people implement Google Analytics by putting a web viewer on a FileMaker layout and having that web viewer load an external website. Well, it turns out that Google Analytics is basically JavaScript based. It goes out, it contacts the Google web servers, pulls down a GIF or attempts to connect to a GIF, including all of the different pieces of information, which are the analytics, in order to track whatever you want to track. So let's go into layout mode, and we will go over to the side of this file, and then we will size this out. Now you're going to see right off the bat that I have a web viewer right here off to the side of the layout. You should also note that here on the side, the web viewer is pushed into the actual layout itself by 1 pixel. Now when I double click the web viewer, you're going to see that it's pretty simple. If we ignore all of the comment that we have right here, it pretty much says if the left of the global variable analytics, if the left of that for 7 characters has the value of file : / then what it's going to do is it's going to load the analytics value. And what it's saying here is it's saying if this is a path to a temporary file within the temporary location on the local computer, then go ahead and use that file. Now, the reason that I've implemented this in 2 different ways is, one, you don't actually need a file at all. You can use what are known as these data URLs, where I am specifying that the information within the web viewer is data and the MIME type is the format of text/HTML. And in that case, if I didn't detect that what was stored within the global variable was a URL to a local file within the temporary space, then what is stored in the analytics global variable is HTML itself. And I simply want you to render that using the data URL. So what gets set into this analytics? Well, let's take a look. Quite simply, there are 2 different custom functions that are the core of how this whole solution works. If we go up to the Manage and look at the custom functions, which is going to require a copy of FileMaker Advanced, you can see that I have 2 specific items that are required. Now, the first is Google Analytics ID. And you're going to probably ask, at some point when you're looking at the technique file, why didn't I just integrate the ID directly into the analytics code, the HTML code? Well, the reason for this is if you think beyond just tracking with one ID, you would be able to, within the exact same FileMaker solution, track based on multiple IDs. So I wanted to give myself the ability to do that. So the Google Analytics event, actually, which should be renamed, it's not just the event that we're tracking. The Google Analytics event custom function here is what contains the HTML code, and we'll take a look at that. But the analytics ID in this technique file, as you can see, is the analytics ID of the account that we were looking at towards the beginning of this video. This is the ID that you would use that is assigned to your given profile when you're within your Google Analytics account. Don't use this ID because obviously you'll be collecting metrics for me or multiplying my metrics, which really doesn't bother me if you want to go ahead and do that. But basically, you're going to use that ID and potentially others in order to track different areas of your solution if you decide to break things down that way. Again, everything with regards to what you send to Google Analytics and how you divide that up and how you filter it is completely up to you. So now let's take a look at the actual code. When we look at the code, what you're going to see is that this is a straightforward list function. Everything down here is a bunch of comments and references that you can use, some URLs and some notes and information. But basically what we have is a list function that's creating some HTML code. You can see that we have the opening HTML tag, the opening head tag, then we have the actual title. Now, one of the pieces of information that Google Analytics actually tracks, let me bring this back on screen, is if we take a look at the overview and then we click on this, you can see right here where we have this site content. I've got page. All of my pages are representative of all of my different layouts. But if I click on page title, notice that I get many more titles than I have actual pages. I did this to prove the point that by changing the title itself, in contrast to the layout that you're at, you get a different perspective on the metrics that you collect. You can see that I have some other title, I have another layout, I have not set, I have main, and yet another, where these 3 actually mirror the actual names of the layouts. But the title itself of the page that you generate does not necessarily have to be the same as the layout name. But that's exactly what I've done. Within the title tag, I've used the getLayoutName. Now next comes all of the script, which is actually the part that is supplied to you, which Google Analytics tells you to put on your web page. But of course, we're not putting it into a web page, we're putting it into code, which is dynamically generated. So you can see right here that there are a few core things that are absolutely required. One of them is right here, this GAQ, which I believe stands for Google Analytics queue, because it creates an array or a queue of items that it's going to send, because it works in an asynchronous mode. You'll have to read up on this on Google Analytics and how it actually works. But essentially, it boils down to we need the account, which in this case is the inbound ID. That's the ID that I showed you in that other custom function, which with this being variable allows me to change it and use multiple IDs even within the same solution, as I explained. You can also force set the domain name. Now there are a number of things that you can do here by being able to actually control the domain name. You can use any fake bogus name as long as it's a domain name that Google Analytics will represent, even if it's one that you don't necessarily control. So for example, I could put in here blank.com, or let's say that because this is a FileMaker calculation, I was to do something like client1.blank.com. As long as it looks like a valid URL, then you can actually track that information. So I currently have this set to none. Now, there are many other methods that you have access to. Just one of them that I've put in here is set referrer override. So if you think about this, one of the things that a web page does is it tracks where you came from in relation to the page that you land on. Well, by using a global variable called previous layout and using an onLayoutExit script, I can actually track the piece of information such as what layout did they come from and what layout are they landing on. There's also things such as set session cookie timeout. Now this for me was an attempt to try to get FileMaker to recognize that this is the exact same session. It's the same user when they open this copy of FileMaker. I currently haven't figured out a way to actually make that happen, and I believe it's because of how FileMaker has implemented the rendering in the web viewer and how that relates to cookies, because obviously using a cookie is how Google Analytics knows that it's the same user and basically track this user based on the fact that they're just going to a different page within the same session. Haven't figured that out specifically yet, haven't had a need for it, but I was playing with that. You'll see that I have a note within here, and I talk about that down at the bottom here, note number 1. Now some of the other things that we have are the ability to actually override the title. While this doesn't necessarily make sense, I wanted to put this in here because it is an undocumented title override, so that you know that because of this JavaScript, even if you had a title or a physical web page that you were hitting, you are able to override that title by pushing it through using the JavaScript. Finally, we get to the core element, which is the track page view function. That function is where you're able to pass any piece of information that you want, that within analytics you're then going to be able to filter out or run reports on. Now the way that you structure your paths or your quote-unquote URLs is completely up to you. You can see that the bare minimum that I've done here is /getLayoutName, but I want to give you some insight to what you could do. Let's say, for example, you had a UUID, and I'm not going to take the time to put in a UUID, but I'll just put in a bunch of numbers, and then I'll put something like a layout name, and then I'll put something like a button clicked. Now you can track all of this information completely how you want, where maybe this represents a given copy of a FileMaker solution that some user downloaded. This is the layout that they actually went to. This is the button that they clicked. You can go as deep and as long as you want with all of these different paths. So obviously, you can get pretty complex in terms of how you track. And also within Google Analytics, you can actually do regular expressions on paths of pages that are visited. And remember, these are virtual or pseudo pages, and you can force them to become something else. You can do these things, I forget what they are, but if you go into all of the different advanced areas within Google Analytics, you can do a lot of manipulation to the data that is collected. What you need to be aware of is you want to have a really consistent data model for what is sent to Google Analytics, and then from there you're able to generate all of your different reporting. Now the tracking page view is the most fundamental in terms of what you need. And I don't even believe that you have to have a track page view if you want to go straight to the event, which is tracking events. When you track events, this is where you get everything that I was talking about with relation to, say, a video, where the event or the category would be something like video, the action would be play, and then from there you have label, and then you have even further options beyond that. You have more than just these three. And the only two that are required are category and action. So one of the things that I've done, if we take a look at this, is I've implemented in a fashion where I've put an on layout enter. So if we go to the layout setup for this particular layout, and that was just the wrong key for my solution, there we go. And we look at the script triggers, we can see that this particular layout on layout enter says set analytics code. And the on layout exit says on layout exit script. So if we take a look at those, we're going to see how simple this actually is. Not the defined, we want the scripts themselves. So here's the only one core script that's actually required. And I want you to keep in mind that, remember, this is referencing global variables. So if these global variables referencing either a path to a file or HTML content, if they don't exist, then the web viewer won't actually track and send the information to Google Analytics. So if we take a look at the scripts and we look at the set analytics code, you can see what happens. And remember, I'm running this on layout enter trigger. You can run this code or similar code on anything, on a button that's pressed, on a report that's printed, on a routine that is run. Anything that you want to track, you can. So essentially, the default method, you can see right here according to this note, the default rendering in the web viewer is a data URL as text HTML MIME type. You can see that the very first variable is use.localFile. So if this was set to true, which I'll do right now, and say OK, then what happens is the script will change how it actually works. And now the reason that I did this is I was testing the difference between sessions, whether referencing the exact same HTML file locally would maintain the session state as opposed to constantly rendering a data URL within the web viewer and getting new users based on, or what Google Analytics considers new users based on each time that a particular thing is tracked. So if this is set to true, the use local file, then what happens is I'm actually taking the analytics code and I'm setting the export field to that content. Now the content that I'm setting is everything that we set right here within the global variable. That Google Analytics, that is all the HTML, passing in the proper ID that I want to track for this particular script. You can see that I've said layouts, entered, and get layout name are all of the different pieces of information. So the category was layouts, the category could be button, the category could be report, the category can be anything that you want. The action could be entered, the action could be printed, the action could be closed solution. It can be whatever you want. And the same with the label and all of the additional pieces of information. Well, if it's a local file, then simply we push the path to the temporary path, and I created an HTML file called tracking.html. I export what was pushed into the export field based on that path, and then I set the variable to basically be a file URL. And that's where the web viewer itself determines if this starts with a URL that I should reference locally, then I'm going to load that file. And this is just an alternative method, but the default method is that you don't even need to export anything. And this will work on FileMaker Mobile, and it will work on desktop as well, using just data text URLs. I do need to put a pause in for some reason. I've noticed that the web viewer needs a pause in order to render. I'm using a number that the web viewer doesn't actually respect. It doesn't respect point or decimal values within the pause resume script, but it will go much faster than if you were to put 1 second, which you definitely don't want to wait 1 second. And then finally, this tracking is the object name of the web viewer on each and every layout that I happen to be tracking, and the action is reset. And this is what actually goes out and hits the web page, or hits the Google Analytics, and then tracks all the information for you. And then finally, what we do is we set the variable of analytics to be empty. So again, here my point in doing this, in using a global variable, is for this very reason. If I was in browse mode and I was simply cycling through records, going one record to the next, if the web viewer retained its content, you would be sending analytics tracking information each time that the user moved to a different record. Now maybe you want to do that. But from the standpoint of wanting to track just a layout to layout move, which is the purpose of this technique, I only want to do it from the time that they come into the layout and then from the time that they leave the layout, or basically when they go to another new layout. And that was my whole purpose in terms of implementing in this technique. Knowing that once I've told you, you can track anything that you want using all pieces of information, you can go hog wild and make the most comprehensive Google Analytics FileMaker solution tracking possible thing known to man. And that's what makes this really cool. Knowing that you can do it, without having to reference an external web page, knowing that you can by default just have it automatically track layouts. All you have to do is throw on a script trigger and a web viewer on the layout, and you're pretty much good to go. So there's only a few more things that I want to talk about, and one of them is actually knowing that tracking is working, and I'll show you how I accomplish that on the Mac. And I can even go into how so far as to see that it actually is tracking, which I'll tack on. It'll make this video much longer if you want to hang out and watch that. I think it's pretty cool and interesting to know. But down here in the technique file, the one thing that I do want to give you is the link to developers.google.com analytics dev guides. So let's bring this forward, and this is where you're going to get all of the information about the Google Analytics tracking code. Now currently, Google Analytics is working on something that is going to become the older method of tracking, and that's ga.js. The newer method, which is in beta, and you have to actually make a request, is going to be analytics.js, which will track even more. Because if you go into Google Analytics and you say, for example, go to admin, Google Analytics is being used to track a lot more than just web pages. Solution developers are using it because they've got APIs for iOS and for Android. And while those don't apply to us from the standpoint of being FileMaker developers, it does mean that more and more different pieces of information are going to be available for us to be able to track. For example, with iOS and Android, they can track screen moves, which is exactly the same as what we're doing by using the web version of Google Analytics to track layout moves from one layout to the other. So everything within here is going to give you all of the information that you need. When you expand this, it's ga.js is what this technique file is based on. Methods, and if you go to basic configuration, for example, you'll see all of the different methods that are some of the different methods that I've actually referenced. Setting cookie persistence. You can always tell whether something is still supported or not based on this word deprecated. The timeouts, all of these different things. If you look at the methods themselves, you're even going to see things such as, I believe it's in here, let me do a find. Well, there we've got that, get visitor custom var. You also have things such as detecting flash. I don't know why you'd need that. But one of the other interesting things, for example, is all of these items right here, campaigns. You can do specific things in order to track metrics based on goals and objectives or workflows that you want users to actually move through within your solution. So if you really get into Google Analytics, you can use a combination of campaigns and these things such as the goals in order to actually track how the user gets through. They have things such as track social, which I've never even used, but knowing that it's there gives me the idea that maybe I might want to use that if I want, for some reason, people to tweet about my FileMaker solution, if it's a commercial solution. There's really just a ton of stuff that you can dive into, and the fact that knowing that you can do this within the web viewer and doing it with a data URL is really, really the cool part of what we're talking about. Okay, so I've now provided you with the core of how easy it is to implement Google Analytics and putting tracking into your solution. Google Analytics, free. You don't have to come up with all of the different reporting. You just have to come up with the scheme that you want to implement in order to track different things. And I suggest sitting down and thinking about what you want to track and how you want to track it, knowing that you can use the URL path. You can set that. You have a domain name. You have a title available to you. You have the ability to track based on events, and you can even get into things such as custom vars. And it's very easy to put that web viewer on the layout and to trigger things based on all of FileMaker's triggers, buttons, etc. This is now diving into the uber geeky stuff to be able to see what's actually going on behind the scenes. And the reason I'm showing you this is because, one, it's nice to know that it's there, and two, if you know that it's there and you need to troubleshoot, then you're able to do this. Unfortunately, this, to my knowledge, is only going to be available on Macintosh because I've not done it on Windows and I don't know how to do it on Windows. I'm sure it's possible because one of the programs that I'll be using is available. Now I'm going to be using a program called Wireshark to take a look at the fact that FileMaker is actually connecting and then sending the information to Google Analytics. Now in most of our web browsers, if you're working with a web page, it's very easy to debug because they have built-in tools. But within FileMaker, within the web viewer, we can't access a debugger unless you actually put a pseudo debugger within the actual HTML itself, which you can do. But I'm going to show you how to use packet analysis, or basically be able to look at the network packets and what's happening. Now, the easiest tool that I know of is a tool that I use called Snitch, which is basically a firewall, but it's not just an inbound firewall, it's an outbound firewall as well. So by selecting on this little icon up here in the top, we've got this Little Snitch network monitor. And Little Snitch is basically looking at all of the packets that are going across the network. We can see that it has a list of all of the applications, and one of those is FileMaker Pro Advanced. So when I select on a specific application, what we see down here in the graph is, as opposed to all traffic from all applications, which is showing right now, I have FileMaker's traffic specific. We can see that one of the URLs that it's recently hit was safebrowsing-cache.google.com. So what I'm going to do is you watch over here in this area, right here, and watch what happens when I go over to my technique file and start clicking around. So I clicked and I went to a layout. I'll go to another layout, and then I'll go to this layout, and then I'll go to this layout. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select and highlight on this code to get it to focus or zero in on this specific time frame, starting at 0 minutes right here, or 0 seconds, going all the way up to 3 minutes. So you can see that we've got these little bumps representing both inbound and outbound traffic. So I can see that because FileMaker is selected, and when I move to a layout, I can see that the actual hit was being made and sent to Google Analytics. Now this is just the visual part that allows me to see that information is being transmitted. Little Snitch also has a very cool feature that if you right-click on the application name, you have this option right here to capture traffic of FileMaker Pro Advanced. So if I say yes, and I'll just put this right on the desktop, and now we've got this red little dot and traffic is being tracked. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click on one layout. Just one. I'll come back over to Little Snitch and then I will say stop capture. From this point, I now need to open a packet capture, network packet capture and analysis tool. Now there's a number of them. One of them that is available on the Macintosh that's free and not necessarily super visual is, I think it's Tasty, let me see, Cocoa, there it is right there. This program called Cocoa Packet Analyzer. This will actually open the output that was created by Little Snitch to see what was actually captured. But the one that I tend to prefer is the one that's pretty much the industry standard, and that is Wireshark. In order to get Wireshark running, you have to have X11 installed. And Apple stopped making X11. They created, there is an open initiative called Xquartz, and that's what Wireshark runs on. So this requires you to go install Xquartz first, then install actually Wireshark. So let's do, oh, wrong keys. There we go, Wireshark. So when Wireshark opens, Wireshark is a packet analysis tool that allows you to analyze network packets. And these network packets are stored within these files called PCAP. And PCAP is what Little Snitch actually created. So if I go up to the File menu and I go Open here, and I'll sort by modified, and I will scroll down. I'm on the desktop, and I believe it's going to be right there, FileMaker Pro Advanced. So here is the packet. I want to go ahead and open this. And you can see in all of this, and when you're using a larger monitor, you can see a lot more what's actually going on. But this is captured when I told Little Snitch to capture all of the packets, and I went into FileMaker and I made one click that refreshed one web viewer, which sent information to Google Analytics. These are all of the network packets that were captured by Little Snitch. And we can see as we walk through here, we can see that it is the HTTP protocol that was used. We can see that we got a 200 response, which means it went out, it contacted the Google Analytics website, asked for the JavaScript, got the JavaScript back. You can see then made another request to the utm.gif, and that included all of the information. As I scroll over here, you're going to see all of the things that Google Analytics actually tracks, such as the monitor size or the resolution. We can see that I'm recording this video at 1280 by 720. That's how Google Analytics gets all of this information. Well, it did that once on the actual request, which was the page view, but then a second time on the event. You can see right here that I have this event that includes all of the information that I was passing. That was all of the event information, such as the category, the label, etc. And I passed the pieces of information, layouts, entered, and the name of the layout. So you can see that you can pass whatever you want, and this is how I actually track to make sure that the request is being made and sent, and I'm getting all of the analytics being tracked. So there we have it. There we have using Google Analytics to do user tracking, or pretty much tracking of anything that you want using the free Google Analytics. You don't have to build a system into your own FileMaker solution. You can just use what is currently available and do it very easily into your own solution. I hope throughout the course of this video you've gained a lot more insight into what you can do with FileMaker, and in this case Google Analytics as well. I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker solutions, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.